Each season, we see big names getting moved, but in most cases, we see those trades coming before they actually happen. Last year, James Harden and Russell Westbrook were unsurprisingly moved. The year before that, D'Angelo Russell and Andre Drummond were dealt after being in trade rumors for months, and this trend has continued into this season. Ben Simmons, John Wall, and Marvin Bagley are all expected to be playing for new teams soon, so there's not really much sense in talking about these players. However, there are many players that aren't being talked about nearly as much that could be great pickups for playoff or championship caliber teams. In today's video, I'm going to be highlighting 5 players who are silently being thrown around in trade discussions and where I think the best fit for these players would be.
Murray, inside, incredible! They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The first player that I want to discuss is Thaddeus Young. Young was a big piece in the sign and trade that brought DeMar DeRozan to Chicago, but I feel like Young was a bigger loss for Chicago than he was a bigger gain for the Spurs. This isn't to say that Young has played poorly this year, because he's actually been playing quite well. The issue is that his contributions aren't as valuable to a rebuilding team like the Spurs as they could be to a contender. San Antonio is currently 4-11 on the season, and at best they might be able to sneak into the play-in games. While it's definitely good to surround your young core with veterans like Young, he's in the final year of his contract and may look to sign with a more competitive team in the offseason. Young is still good enough to where he could warrant a first-round pick or a young player from a contender. He plays both ends of the floor, he finishes well around the bucket, and he's a tremendous passer for a player his size. The only issue with Young is that he does make a little over $14 million this season, so any team that wanted to trade for him would have to give up a player of some significance. However, with that being said, I'd like to see the Bulls try to bring him back. They'd have to get a third team involved to make a deal happen, but it would be worth it because Young would be a great fit with this team. He could either start or come off the bench, he'd give Chicago another good defensive player, and he'd be able to set up the many good cutters on this team for easy backdoor finishes. On top of that, his ability as a versatile small ball 5 would give the Bulls a weapon that they currently don't have, which would make them that much harder to beat in a playoff series. The next guy on this list is Chris Boucher of the Toronto Raptors. Boucher broke out for the Raptors last season, posting career highs in nearly every statistical category. Unfortunately, Boucher has not been getting consistent minutes this year, which has made it difficult for him to build on what he did the year prior. No one knows the exact reason why Boucher suddenly has a diminished role, but the most likely explanation is that he's at odds with Nick Nurse. Nurse is a coach that doesn't pick favorites, believing that everyone has to earn their minutes. For whatever reason, Boucher has not done enough in Nurse's eyes to earn consistent minutes, as he's only playing him about 13 minutes a night. Like Young, Boucher is set to enter free agency in the summer, and it doesn't seem like the Raptors view him as part of their long-term plans. That being said, I could see the Kings being a good landing spot for Boucher. A trade revolving around Boucher for Bagley would give both players a fresh start, and they'd get more opportunities with their new teams. Boucher will be turning 29 in January, so he's not exactly old, and he could be a really solid backup big for Sacramento. On offense, he can stretch the floor and make athletic plays around the rim, and defensively, he's shown an ability to block shots. Boucher has only had one season in the NBA where he's gotten major minutes, so I think Boucher would be grateful to possibly play a large role in Sacramento, and would play well as a result. Speaking of Sacramento, I expect this to be the year that they trade Buddy Hield. In the 2018-19 season, the Kings went 39-43, finishing as the 9th seed out west. Considering they were a young team, Sacramento wanted to keep their core players in the hopes of making the playoffs. One of their guys that was looking for extension was Buddy Hield. During the 2019 season, Hield averaged just under 21 points a night on great efficiency, so the Kings decided to give him a 4-year, $94 million extension. Unfortunately, Sacramento has not made the playoffs since giving Hield that extension, and their playoff drought doesn't appear to be ending this season either. At this point, it would be in Sacramento's best interest to trade Hield, and hope that that loses them a few more games to help their draft position. In a previous video, I mentioned that Philadelphia would be a good spot for Hield, and I'm still on board with that. Hield would give the Sixers another shooter to surround Embiid with, and while he's thought of as a great off-ball player, he can also create for himself and for others. On top of that, Hield is a great shooter in transition, which give a slower-paced Sixers team another layer on offense. Moving on to someone that has been brought up in trade rumors is Jeremy Grant of the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons may have a 4-11 record right now, but they've been a lot better since Cade Cunningham has returned. Since Cade's debut, Detroit has gone 4-6, and 2 of those losses came in games that were decided by 2 possessions or less. With Cade and Grant, Detroit is a respectable team, but one could question if it's worth it for the Pistons to be respectable this year. Cade looks like a future star, but they don't appear to have any other young players with that same upside. By moving on from Grant, Detroit could clear some cap space, bring in some young assets, and improve their chances of getting a top pick in the upcoming draft. Recent reports have been connecting Grant to Philly in exchange for Ben Simmons, but I don't see this trade actually happening. In my eyes, a more realistic destination would be Portland. Just like years past, the Blazers are a great offensive team, but a bad defensive team. A trade for Grant may not improve their defense too much, but it would make their already great offense even better. A starting lineup of Dame, CJ, Powell, Grant, and Nurkic could contend for the best offense in the league, especially once Dame recovers from his injury and starts looking like his old self. Again, Jeremy Grant doesn't fix this team's defensive issues, but in a Western Conference that is pretty wide open, I wouldn't be surprised if the Blazers thought Grant could help them go on a playoff run. The last player on this list is Miles Turner of the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers are off to a rough start to begin the year, and while I do expect them to be better once they reach full health, this team is a first-round exit at best. I haven't been a big fan of the Sabonis and Turner frontcourt for a while now, and splitting them up would allow for Indiana to reset things. I was debating between a few teams, but the Charlotte Hornets stood out as the best destination for Miles Turner. The Hornets are an interconference team, which could be enough to prevent the Pacers from sending him there, but I do believe it could pay dividends for them. In this trade, the Pacers would be getting PJ Washington, James Bouknight, Ish Smith, and 2 future first-rounders. Washington would be a more natural catch-and-shoot player next to Sabonis, Bouknight has lots of scoring potential, Ish Smith helps make the salaries work, and the Pacers would be getting some additional draft capital as well. In Charlotte's case, Miles Turner would be the perfect center for their team. First of all, he's only 25 years old, and secondly, he'd help them out on both ends of the floor. Turner is a better finisher around the rim than Plumlee is, but he's also a much better mid-range, three-point, and free throw shooter than Plumlee. His versatile offensive skill set would open up the Hornets' offense even more, and I'm confident that Turner would play the most efficient basketball of his career, playing next to an elite playmaker in LaMelo Ball. However, where Turner would help this team the most is on the defensive end. The Hornets currently rank in the bottom third of the league in defensive rating, and adding an elite defender in Turner would certainly improve that. Turner would make the Hornets much more difficult to score on in pick-and-roll situations, and he'd help make up for some of the defensive mistakes of his teammates due to his shot-blocking ability. The Hornets have already put together a good young team, and adding Turner would put them one step closer to reaching contender status. That's going to be all for today's video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And with all that being said, I'm out, and I'll see you in the next video.